Hey, my name is Evan. I'm 28. 3 months ago, I was driving through a snowstorm when I saw hazard lights on the side of the highway. When I pulled over, it was my mom's best friend, Olivia, standing in the snow, her green scarf whipping in the wind, looking like she'd been waiting her whole life for someone to rescue her. We got snowed in at an empty cabin, and when the heat died, she wrapped a wool blanket around both of us and whispered, "We'll have to keep each other warm." The scratch of that blanket against my neck, the scent of her perfume mixing with wood smoke, I can still feel it all. She was married, she was 17 years older than me, and she was my mother's closest friend. If you're watching this right now, tell me where you're from in the comments. Because I still don't know if what we did was wrong. I was driving out of the city when the snow started falling harder than the forecast predicted. My phone buzzed against the dashboard, Mom's voice filling the car through the speakers. "Evan, honey, I need you to swing by the lake cabin when you get a chance. My cousin's been asking someone to check on it before the real cold hits. Keys under the blue flower pot. Just make sure the pipes didn't freeze and the generator still turns over." I'd planned to drive straight to Mom's house, maybe grab dinner and crash on her couch before my Monday morning demo. But the cabin was only 20 minutes out of the way, and Mom never asked for favors unless she really needed them. The highway curved through pine trees heavy with snow, visibility dropping by the mile. That's when I saw the hazard lights. A silver sedan sat on the shoulder, perfectly positioned, like someone who knew how to handle an emergency without panicking. I slowed down, squinting through my windshield. The driver's door opened and a woman stepped out. Even through the snow, I recognized her immediately. Olivia Mercer, Mom's best friend since nursing school. The woman who used to bring me books when I was sick, who always remembered to ask about my classes, who laughed at my terrible teenage jokes like they were actually funny. I pulled over and rolled down my passenger window. She walked toward my truck, her green scarf wrapped tight around her neck, moving with that careful grace she'd always had. "Evan?" Her voice carried that same warmth I remembered, but there was relief in it now. "Thank God. My car just died." "Engine trouble?" "I think so. It was running fine, then just nothing." She brushed snow off her sleeve. "I was heading to your mom's for dinner, but I should probably call a tow truck instead." I looked at my phone. One bar, flickering. "Good luck getting service out here in this weather." "Come on, get in. We'll figure it out." She hesitated. "Are you sure? I don't want to." "Olivia." I met her eyes through the falling snow. "Get in the truck." She grabbed her purse from the sedan and climbed into my passenger seat, bringing the scent of her perfume and cold air with her. Something subtle and expensive that I'd noticed at holiday dinners, but never had a name for. "Thank you," she said, settling into the seat and pulling off her gloves. I was starting to think I'd be spending the night in there. "Mom asked me to check on the family cabin anyway. We can call for a tow from there, assuming the landline still works." She nodded, folding her scarf with the same precise movements I remembered from Christmas dinners at Mom's house, always composed, always put together, even stranded on a snowy highway. "How far is the cabin?" "Maybe 15 minutes if I take it slow." I checked my mirrors and pulled back onto the empty road. "You okay? You seem tired," she finished. "It's been a long week, month, year, actually." I glanced at her profile as she stared out the window. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there the last time I'd really looked at her, shadows under them that makeup couldn't quite hide. "Work? Work? Home? Life?" She let out a breath that fogged the window. "You know how it is." I didn't actually. I was 28, single, living in a studio apartment, freelancing IT work and picking up contractor jobs when I needed extra cash. My biggest concern was whether my Monday demo would go well enough to land me a steady client. But there was something in her voice that made me not push for details. The snow fell heavier as we turned onto the lake road. My headlights carved a tunnel through the white pine branches drooping low on both sides. I flashed my high beams twice when I saw the mailbox, more out of habit than necessity. There, I said, turning into the narrow drive. The cabin sat dark against the tree line, windows black and unwelcoming. Mom's cousin had built it in the 70s as a weekend retreat, all wood and stone with a wide porch facing the lake. I'd spent a few summers here as a kid before I got old enough to prefer staying in town with my friends. We parked next to a snowdrift that had built up against the porch steps. I killed the engine, and the silence settled around us like a blanket. "It looks cozy," Olivia said. "It looks cold," I replied, grabbing the flashlight from my glove compartment. "But it's better than your car?" The front door stuck, swollen from the humidity. I had to put my shoulder against it before the lock turned, and it opened with a groan that echoed through the empty rooms. Olivia stepped inside behind me, her boots leaving melting prints on the hardwood floor. I found the light switch and flicked it on. Nothing. "Power's out," I said, sweeping the flashlight beam across the main room. "But there's a generator out back. Let me see if I can get it started." "I'll find some candles," she said. "There used to be some in the kitchen drawers." I made my way to the back door, stepped out onto the small deck where the generator squatted under a tarp. The pull cord was stiff with cold, but on the third try, it caught. The engine coughed, rattled, then settled into a steady hum. Back inside, warm light filled the main room. Olivia had found not just candles, but an oil lamp that threw dancing shadows on the walls. She'd also managed to get the gas stove working, a kettle already heating on one of the burners. "You work fast," I said. "I've stayed here before. Your mom and I used to come up for girls' weekends when you were in high school." She tested the water with her finger. "Back when we thought we knew everything. And now? Now I know I don't know anything." She pulled 2 mugs from the cabinet, found a box of tea bags. "But I can still make decent tea in a crisis." The furnace kicked on with a wheeze, warm air starting to circulate through the rooms. We both stood there for a moment, listening to the house come alive around us. "So," I said, hanging my coat on the back of a chair, "Monday morning, I'll drive you back to your car. We'll get a tow truck, and this will just be a story about the night we got snowed in." "Right?" She poured hot water into the mugs, steam rising between us. "Just a story." But something in her voice made it sound like she didn't quite believe it. The kettle whistled, sharp and urgent. Olivia lifted it from the burner, and we settled into the quiet routine of 2 people making the best of an unexpected situation. That's when the furnace coughed twice and died. We both froze, listening to the sudden silence. The generator hummed outside, but inside, the warm air stopped moving. Within minutes, we could feel the cold seeping back through the windows. "Well," Olivia said, wrapping her hands around her mug, "that's not good." I checked the thermostat, flipped the switch a few times. Nothing. "Probably the connection to the generator. I can try to fix it in the morning, but for tonight—" I walked to the linen closet, found the wool blanket I remembered from childhood visits. Heavy and scratchy, but warm. I carried it back to the main room where Olivia sat on the couch, her shoulders starting to curl inward against the cold. "Here," I said, settling beside her and spreading the blanket across both our shoulders. "We'll have to keep each other warm." The words hung in the air between us, heavier than they should have been. Olivia looked at me, her dark eyes reflecting the candlelight, and I realized this wasn't just about staying warm anymore. This was about the way she'd looked at me during those Christmas dinners, when she thought no one was watching, the way I'd looked back, even though I knew I shouldn't. "Evan," she said quietly, "I know." We sat there under the blanket, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin, far enough apart that we weren't quite touching. The space between us hummed with possibilities we couldn't name. Outside, Wind rattled the windows and snow hissed against the glass. But inside, wrapped in wool and candlelight, we began to tell each other the truths we'd been avoiding for years. The kettle whistled again, forgotten on the stove, and neither of us moved to answer it. "I should turn that off," Olivia said, but she didn't get up. "Probably," I agreed, but I didn't move either. We stayed there, listening to the whistle fade as the water boiled away, both of us understanding that something had started that we couldn't stop, something that had maybe been building since I was 18 and she brought me soup when I had the flu, staying to read aloud from a book about art history until I fell asleep. Something that had been waiting patiently through my college years, through her marriage, through all the careful distance we'd maintained at family gatherings. The blanket scratched against my neck, but I didn't adjust it. Olivia's breathing had steadied beside me, and I found myself matching her rhythm without thinking about it. "This is complicated," she said finally. "Yeah, your mother would. I know. And Colin," she trailed off, her wedding ring catching the lamplight. "I know that too." But knowing didn't seem to matter. Not with her this close, not with the storm building outside and the certainty that we weren't going anywhere until morning. She turned toward me slightly, and I could see the conflict playing across her features. 17 years of friendship with my mother. 15 years of marriage to a man who tracked her movements and smiled with his mouth but never his eyes. And underneath all of that, something she'd been pushing down for longer than either of us wanted to admit. "We should probably try to get some sleep," she said. "Probably?" Neither of us moved. The candles burned lower, throwing longer shadows. The generator hummed its steady rhythm outside. And somewhere in that quiet space, we stopped pretending this was just about staying warm. "Olivia," I said, "don't." She shook her head. "Don't say whatever you're about to say. Not yet." So I didn't. But I shifted closer, just enough that our shoulders touched through the blanket. She didn't pull away. We sat there in the growing dark, two people who'd found themselves in exactly the place they'd been trying to avoid, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, that felt like exactly where we needed to be. The storm picked up outside, wind howling around the corners of the cabin. But inside, under that scratchy wool blanket, we'd found something warm and dangerous and completely unexpected. Something that felt like the beginning of everything and the end of everything, all at once. I closed my eyes and listened to her breathe, memorizing the sound. Tomorrow, we'd have to figure out how to drive back to our separate lives. Tonight, we could sit here and let ourselves want what we'd been trying not to want. The kettle had gone quiet on the stove. The candles flickered lower. And somewhere in that silence, I felt Olivia's hand find mine under the blanket. We didn't talk about it. We just held on. Two people caught in a storm that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the space we'd finally stopped trying to maintain between us. Morning would come. Decisions would have to be made. But for now, we had this: wool and warmth and the dangerous luxury of not pretending anymore, even if we couldn't say it out loud, even if we didn't know what came next. The mantle photos caught my attention in the flickering light. Summer shots from years past, me at 16 standing between Mom and Olivia at some long-forgotten barbecue, all three of us laughing at something just outside the frame. Olivia followed my gaze and smiled, but it was sad around the edges. "I remember that day," she said. "You'd just gotten your license. You were so proud. You taught me parallel parking that summer. In that terrible old Honda, I thought we were both going to die. But you kept coming back every Saturday until I got it right. You were determined. I like that about you." The past tense hung between us like a question neither of us wanted to answer. "What changed?" I asked. She was quiet for so long I thought she wouldn't respond. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You grew up." Outside, something heavy crashed in the distance, a tree branch maybe, or a piece of loose siding. We both jumped. then laughed at our own reaction. Storm's getting worse, I said. Good thing we're not out in it. But we both knew the real storm wasn't outside. It was here, in this room, in the space between us that felt smaller with each passing minute. Evan, she said, and this time there was something different in her voice, something that made me turn to face her fully. Yeah? I need you to know something. About that summer, when you were sick. I remembered. The flu that knocked me flat for a week, Mom working double shifts at the hospital, Olivia stopping by every day with soup and books and that quiet presence that made even being sick feel less lonely. What about it? I didn't come because your mom asked me to. Why did you come? Because I wanted to take care of you. She looked down at her hands. Because 18-year-old you was already... God, I can't believe I'm saying this. Already what? Already someone I thought about more than I should have. The confession settled between us like snow accumulating on a windowsill. Slow, inevitable, changing the landscape of everything we thought we knew. Olivia, I know it's wrong. I knew it was wrong then. You were Marianne's son. You were too young. I was married. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. But I thought about it. About you. More than I ever should have. I stared at her profile in the lamplight, processing the weight of what she'd just admitted. 10 years of wondering if I'd imagined the way she'd looked at me sometimes. 10 years of telling myself I was crazy for thinking there might have been something there. I thought I was losing my mind, I said finally. What do you mean? Those looks, the way you'd smile at me sometimes, like we shared a secret no one else knew about. I thought I was making it up. You weren't. The generator outside stuttered once, then caught itself and settled back into its steady rhythm. We both glanced toward the window, reminded of how fragile our little bubble of warmth really was. So what now? I asked. Now nothing. Now we get through the night, and in the morning we pretend this conversation never happened. Do we? She met my eyes, and I saw the war playing out behind them. Duty against desire, friendship against something deeper, the safe life she'd built against the dangerous possibility sitting right beside her. We have to. Why? Because I love your mother. Because she's the best friend I've ever had, and she doesn't deserve to lose her son because I couldn't keep my feelings in check. Maybe it's not about deserving. Maybe it's about what's real. What's real is complicated. What's real is sitting right here. She shook her head, but she didn't pull away when I reached up to brush a strand of hair from her cheek. Her skin was warm under my fingertips, soft in a way that made my chest tight. This is exactly what I was afraid would happen, she whispered. What? This. You touching me wanting you to. My hand was still cupped against her cheek, her face tilted up toward mine. We were close enough that I could count her eyelashes, could see the faint freckles across the bridge of her nose that her makeup usually covered. Are you going to ask me to stop? I should. But are you? The question hung between us like a bridge we could either cross or burn. Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the windows in their frames. The candles flickered, throwing our shadows large and dancing on the wall. No, she said finally. I'm not. So I kissed her, soft at first, hesitant, giving her every chance to pull away. But she didn't. Instead, she leaned into me, her hand coming up to rest against my chest, and kissed me back with 10 years of suppressed wanting. It lasted maybe 30 seconds. When we broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Jesus, she whispered. Yeah, we can't. I know. But we were still touching, still close enough that I could feel her heartbeat against my palm, still looking at each other like we'd just discovered fire. This is going to ruin everything, she said. Maybe. Or maybe we're finally letting ourselves have something real. Real doesn't matter if it destroys the people we love. She was right, and we both knew it. But sitting there in the candlelight, with her taste still on my lips and her hand still pressed against my chest, it was hard to care about anything beyond the space we occupied under that blanket. So, what do we do? I asked. We don't do this again. Okay. We keep our distance. Okay. And we never, ever tell anyone. Agreed. We shook hands on it, formal and ridiculous, and then started laughing at the absurdity of trying to negotiate our way out of something that felt bigger than both of us. This is insane, she said, wiping tears from her eyes. Completely. Your mother is going to kill us both. Only if she finds out. She's going to find out. She knows me too well. She'll take one look at my face and know exactly what happened here. Then we don't let her see your face. For how long? Forever? The question sobered us both, because the truth was, this wasn't something we could undo. We'd crossed a line, and there was no going back to the careful distance we'd maintained before. The storm outside reached a crescendo, wind screaming around the corners of the cabin. A branch cracked somewhere close by, loud as a gunshot. Maybe we should try to get some sleep, I said. Good idea. But neither of us moved to separate. Instead, we settled deeper into the couch, the blanket pulled up to our chins, her head finding a place against my shoulder that felt like it had been designed specifically for her. This is temporary, she murmured against my neck. I know. Just until morning. Just until morning. But as I listened to her breathing slow and felt her relax against me, I knew we were both lying. This wasn't temporary. This was the kind of thing that changed everything, whether we wanted it to or not. I closed my eyes and tried to memorize the weight of her against my chest, the scent of her perfume mixed with wood smoke and cold air. Tomorrow, we'd have to figure out how to live with what we'd done. Tonight, I could hold her and pretend that the rest of the world didn't exist. The candles burned lower. The generator hummed its lullaby outside. And somewhere between the sound of her breathing and the scratch of wool against my skin, I fell asleep with Olivia Mercer in my arms, knowing it might be the only time I ever got to hold her like this. When I woke, pale gray light was seeping through the windows, and she was still there, still warm against my side. For a moment, I lay perfectly still, afraid that moving would shatter whatever spell had kept her there through the night. But then she stirred, lifted her head to look at me with sleep-soft eyes, and smiled. "Good morning," she whispered. "Morning?" And just like that, we were back to square one. Two people who'd spent the night in each other's arms, trying to figure out how to pretend it had never happened, even though we both knew it was the most real thing either of us had felt in years. The morning light made everything look different. Softer edges, muted colors, like the world had been wrapped in gauze while we slept. Olivia sat up slowly, the blanket falling away from her shoulders, and I immediately missed the weight of her against my chest. "We should," she started, then stopped, running, her hands through her hair. "Yeah." But neither of us moved to get up. Outside, the storm had quieted to occasional gusts, but the snow was still falling in fat, lazy flakes that meant we weren't going anywhere soon. "Coffee?" I offered. "Please." I made my way to the kitchen, grateful for something to do with my hands. The gas stove lit easily, and I found a battered percolator in one of the cabinets. The familiar routine of measuring coffee and water gave me time to think. What the hell had we done? More importantly, what were we going to do now? When I returned to the living room with two steaming mugs, Olivia had folded the blanket and was sitting on the opposite end of the couch. The distance between us felt enormous. "Thank you," she said, wrapping her hands around the mug like she was trying to warm more than just her fingers. We drank our coffee in silence, watching the snow fall outside the windows. The lake was barely visible through the trees, a gray expanse that blended into the sky. How bad do you think the roads are? She asked finally. Bad. Main highways probably closed. Side roads will be worse. So we're stuck. Looks like it. She nodded, processing this. I should try to call Colin. Let him know I'm okay. Right. Of course. She found her phone, held it up to catch what little signal might be available. One bar flickered, then disappeared. Nothing, she said. You? I checked mine. Same result. We're in a dead zone anyway. Even on good days, service is spotty out here. He'll be worried. The way she said it made me wonder if that was true, or if Colin Mercer was the type of man who would be more annoyed than worried about his wife's unexpected absence. What about your mom? Olivia asked. She'll be expecting both of us for dinner. She'll figure it out. Mom's practical. She knows what snow like this can do to travel plans. Olivia nodded, but I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. She was already planning how to explain this, how to make it sound normal and innocent, how to make sure no one suspected what had really happened here. We need ground rules, she said suddenly. Okay. No touching. No, what we did last night. Agreed. And we don't talk about it. Not here, not ever. Understood. I mean it, Evan. This has to stay buried. It's buried. But even as I said it, I was watching the way the morning light caught the gold in her hair, remembering how it felt to wake up with her warm and sleepy against my chest. Some things, once awakened, don't go back to sleep easily. Good, she said, but her voice sounded hollow. Good. We finished our coffee and set about the business of surviving another day. I went outside to check the generator and clear snow from around the cabin. Olivia organized the kitchen, taking inventory of what food we had available, normal domestic tasks that felt anything but normal. When I came back inside, stamping snow off my boots, she was standing at the kitchen sink with her back to me. Something about the set of her shoulders told me she'd been crying. Hey, I said softly. You okay? Fine. She didn't turn around. Just tired. Olivia, don't. She held up a hand without looking at me. Please, I can't. If you're kind to me right now, I'm going to fall apart. So I gave her space. I found a book on the shelf and settled into the chair by the window, far enough away that she couldn't accuse me of breaking our newly established rules, but close enough that I could keep an eye on her. The day passed slowly. We read, we played cards with a deck I found in a drawer, we made sandwiches from supplies in the pantry. We talked about safe things, work, weather, books we'd read. We didn't talk about the way she'd kissed me back like she'd been waiting years to do it. We didn't talk about how right it had felt to fall asleep together. And we definitely didn't talk about the fact that we were both trying very hard not to look at each other too long. But the awareness was there, humming between us like a live wire, every accidental brush of fingers when we passed plates, every moment when our eyes met across the room before one of us looked away. The tension was exhausting. By afternoon, the snow had stopped, but the wind had picked up again. Through the windows, we could see the drifts building against the trees, sculpting the landscape into something alien and beautiful. It's like we're the last people on Earth, Olivia said, standing at the window with her arms wrapped around herself. Is that good or bad? I don't know yet. Her phone buzzed against the coffee table and we both jumped. One bar had appeared, weak but persistent. Colin, she said, looking at the screen. I nodded and moved to the kitchen, giving her privacy for the call, but the cabin wasn't big enough to avoid hearing her side of the conversation. Hi, honey. Yes, I'm fine. No, the roads are completely blocked. I'm at the lake cabin with Evan, Marianne's son. He was checking on the place when my car broke down. A long pause. I could hear the low rumble of his voice through the phone, but not the words. I don't know when. Maybe tomorrow if the plows come through. I'm sorry, I know you were expecting me home. Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice was different, smaller. No, that's not necessary. Colin, please, don't drive up here. The roads are dangerous. I gripped the edge of the counter, listening to her try to convince her husband not to come rescue her. There was something in her tone that made my stomach clench. Okay, yes, I'll call when I can. Love you too. She ended the call and sat heavily on the couch. I waited a moment before returning to the living room. Everything okay? He wants to drive up here, says he has chains, he can make it. That's. I searched for a diplomatic way to say it. That's not a great idea in this weather. No, it's not, she rubbed her temples, but Colin doesn't like it when his plans get disrupted. There was something in the way she said his plans that made me want to ask more questions, but I could see she was already stressed enough. Did you talk him out of it? For now, but he'll call back. He always calls back. As if summoned by her words, the phone buzzed again. She looked at it and sighed. See? This time, I couldn't help but overhear Colin's voice through the speaker, calm, measured, but with an edge that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Olivia, I've been thinking, I really think I should come get you. You shouldn't be stuck there with some stranger. He's not a stranger, Colin. You've met Evan. At Christmas parties, remember? That was years ago, and he's a man, Olivia. It's not appropriate for you to be alone with him overnight. I saw her face flush, whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. I'm 44 years old, she said quietly. I think I can handle myself. That's not the point. The point is appearances. What are people going to say? People aren't going to say anything because people don't need to know. Ruth Alvarez saw you driving toward the lake yesterday. She asked me about it at the hardware store this morning. Olivia closed her eyes. Ruth Alvarez sees everything and knows nothing. She knows enough. Look, I'm coming to get you. I can be there in 2 hours. Colin, no, the roads. I said I have chains. And I said no. Her voice was firmer now, and I felt a surge of pride watching her stand her ground. I'm not going to be responsible for you getting hurt trying to play hero in a blizzard. Silence on the other end. Then, we'll discuss this when you get home. The line went dead. Olivia stared at the phone for a long moment, then set it face down on the table. Shit, she whispered. Hey! I sat down across from her, careful to maintain distance. It's going to be okay. No, it's not. Ruth Alvarez is the biggest gossip in 3 counties. By tomorrow, half the town will know I spent the night here with you. So? You were stranded. It's not like we had a choice. She looked at me with something like pity. Evan, you don't understand how small towns work. Choice doesn't matter. Innocence doesn't matter. All that matters is what it looks like. What does it look like? It looks like a married woman spent the night alone in a cabin with a younger man who isn't her husband. The words hung between us, loaded with implications we both understood. Because that's exactly what had happened. And while the town might not know about the kiss, about the way we'd held each other through the night, the basic facts were enough to damage her reputation. And mine, probably, though I had less to lose. I'm sorry, I said. This is my fault. If I hadn't offered to help... Stop. She shook her head. You did exactly what any decent person would do. I'm the one who... She gestured vaguely between us. I'm the one who made it complicated. We both did. I married Evan. The responsibility is mine. I wanted to argue with that. Wanted to tell her that marriage to a man who tracked her movements and dismissed her autonomy didn't automatically make her the villain here. But I could see she was already carrying enough guilt for both of us. Instead, I said, What do you want to do? I want to go back in time and make different choices. Can't help you there. What else? She almost smiled at that. I want to minimize the damage. Figure out how to explain this so it doesn't destroy my friendship with your mother or my marriage. In that order? What do you mean? You listed your friendship with Mom first. She considered this. Yeah, I guess I did. We spent the rest of the afternoon strategizing. Story coordination, she called it, making sure our versions matched if anyone asked questions. We'd been stranded by weather, nothing more. Two adults being practical about an emergency situation. It felt like preparing for a trial we hadn't committed any crime for. But I supposed, in a way, we had committed a crime. Against expectation, against the rules that governed relationships between married women and younger men, against the careful boundaries that kept small town society functioning. We'd committed the crime of wanting each other. As evening fell, we made dinner together in the tiny kitchen. Pasta with sauce from a jar, bread that was starting to go stale, simple food that tasted better than it had any right to, maybe because we'd both forgotten to eat much during the day. This is good, Olivia said, twirling spaghetti around her fork. It's mediocre at best. No, I mean, she gestured around the kitchen, the cabin, the space we'd managed to make, warm despite everything. This, being here, having an excuse to just exist without having to perform. Perform what? Perfect wife, successful professional, put together woman who has her life figured out. She took a sip of wine from a bottle I'd found in the pantry. I'm so tired of performing. What would you do if you could stop? I don't know. That's the problem. I've been performing for so long, I'm not sure who I am underneath it all. You're someone who brings books to sick teenagers, someone who remembers to ask about people's dreams, someone who can make terrible coffee taste good just by the way she holds the mug. She looked at me across the small table, eyes bright with something that might have been tears. You see me? She said softly. Yeah, that's dangerous. I know. Because if someone really sees me, I might start believing I'm worth seeing. You are. Don't. You are worth seeing, Olivia. You're worth knowing. You're worth. Stop. She held up her hand. Please, I can't. We agreed. But something had shifted during dinner, during the quiet conversation and shared wine. The careful distance we'd maintained all day was starting to crack. We should go to bed, she said, standing to clear the plates. Separately, on opposite sides of the cabin. Good idea. You take the bedroom, I'll sleep on the couch. No, you take the bedroom. I'm fine on the couch. We argued about it for 10 minutes before agreeing that we'd both sleep in the living room, on opposite couches, with our own blankets. It seemed like the safest compromise. But as we settled into our respective beds for the night, the living room felt smaller than it had before. Every sound she made turning over, every sigh, every shift of fabric seemed amplified in the darkness. Olivia? I said into the quiet. Yeah? Are you okay? Really? Ask me tomorrow. What if tomorrow doesn't change anything? What if we still feel? We don't talk about how we feel. Why not? Because feelings are dangerous. They make people do stupid things. What if the stupid thing is pretending we don't feel them? She was quiet for so long I thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, good night, Evan. Good night. But I lay awake for hours, listening to her breathe across the room, thinking about dangerous feelings and stupid choices and the way her hand had felt in mine under that scratchy wool blanket. Thinking about the fact that tomorrow, we'd have to leave this cabin and go back to our real lives, where she was my mother's best friend and I was just the contractor who sometimes fixed her computer. Where this would have to become just a story about the night we got snowed in, even though we both knew it was so much more than that. The wind picked up again outside, rattling the windows and making the old cabin creak like a ship at sea. And somewhere in that sound, I heard the echo of what we'd started here, the dangerous thing that wouldn't easily be put back to sleep. Some storms, I realized, don't end when the weather clears. Some storms just learn to live inside you, quiet and persistent, changing the landscape of everything you thought you knew about yourself. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I wondered if Olivia was lying awake too, listening to the wind and thinking about feelings that were too dangerous to name but too real to ignore. Wondering if she could feel the storm we'd created still building between us, even as we tried our best to take shelter from it. Tomorrow would bring decisions and consequences, and the weight of real life pressing back in. Tonight, we had this: the sound of snow against glass, and the knowledge that some lines, once crossed, exist only in memory. But memory, it turned out, was a country all its own, and we'd just claimed citizenship there together, whether we wanted to or not.